Hi everyone, this is part 2 of the lecture to accompany Chapter 3 in your textbook. Please read Chapter 3, there's lots of things I don't have time to discuss. Okay, we're going to talk specifically about writing argument essays. We will also be going over this in class. This video is fairly brief, but I just want you to understand the process. So now that you know about putting together and defending good arguments, it's time for you to show me what you know. The argument essay assignment page in our class discussions may have given you an idea of what issue you want to talk about, as well as what side of that issue you want to defend. So I won't go into that here. This is specifically about the actual paper itself. Any good argument essay has these 4 components. First, a statement of the issue. It should be general and fair, and you should be very informative here, talking about the background and some history of the issue and why it's relevant. Once you've informed us of the topic, then you'll give us your position on the issue. If you've approached the issue well, this shouldn't be difficult. Be brief but clear. Then you obviously need to state and support or prove each of your arguments. You will need more than one. There should be at least 2 or 3 good arguments to support your thesis. They need to be clearly stated, arranged in a logical sequence. Make sure you have enough supporting material to both meet the assignment requirements and prove or support your conclusions. Anyone reading your paper should be able to see how you're leading them through your arguments to arrive at the conclusion you want them to get to. Don't forget or ignore the opposing arguments. This is a critical part of your essay. You can't just pretend they don't exist. A good critical thinker knows the opponent's arguments. They also understand why the opponent thinks something and why their arguments are better than the opposition. You need to be fair here, though, and be able to say if the opposition actually has a good argument. But you also need to explain why, when all is said and done, your position is better or more correct. You don't have time to refute every possible criticism of your position, so make sure you choose 1 or 2 obvious or popular opposing arguments. So now that we've talked about the things that need to be in your paper, let's talk about how to organize it. Check the assignment page for things like length, formatting, and source requirements. I won't discuss those here. Every good essay has an introduction, body, and conclusion. The introduction section should begin with an interesting opening statement that leads well into a discussion of the issue. Don't make the mistake of blurting out what you're going to do in the first sentence. In other words, don't start with something like, "In this paper, I'm going to argue X." Obviously, you will need to say that at some point in the introduction, but don't do it first thing. You'll want to start with something interesting. The book gives a good example of this. Instead of starting with, "In this essay, I will discuss the rights of animals to inherit property from their masters," you might begin, "Could your inheritance wind up belonging to your mother's cat?" Then you want to generally discuss the issue, its origins and history. Don't spend an inordinate amount of words here. Get the essential background information in that will help the audience understand it. Then before you get into the heart of the matter, you need to state your position on the topic, the one that you're going to argue. You can briefly state what arguments you'll be using and possibly what opposing arguments you're going to rebut, but again, be brief. Don't be guilty of what the textbook refers to as the windy preamble, where the introduction just goes on and on. We want to read your arguments, not all the reasons why this issue is important or every historical detail about it. So the introduction should maybe be a page to a page and a half, no more than that. In the body of the essay, you need to logically lay out your arguments. You're going to need at least 2 good arguments in favor of your position. So let's say, for example, you're arguing that the #MeToo movement about sexual harassment has now gone too far. You need to show in which ways it has gone too far. Maybe your arguments could be, number 1, it seems to imply that the majority of interactions between men and women are negative. And number 2, it's too focused on the past rather than what should change in the future. By the way, those aren't necessarily my viewpoints. I'm simply using them for illustration. So anyway, put those in that order, address the first one, provide examples, what you're talking about, evidence that shows your point of view is a valid one and is supported by that evidence. Then move on to the second argument and do the same thing. Once you've done that, you need to address the opposition. What is it? In this illustration, it might be that the opposition thinks that it's about time these things came to light, and before we move ahead to what needs to be done, we need time to talk about these things. Now, those are actually pretty good arguments, and if you don't acknowledge that, your arguments are going to look poor by comparison. So go ahead and say that the opposition has a point, but maybe rebut that by saying that there's simply too much focus on the negativity in the past, and that you believe that that's going to impede any forward progress. At no point do you attack the opposition by using negative or rhetorical language. You say, here's the argument, here's why it's wrong, or here's their argument, it certainly has its merits, but here's why my arguments are better. So this part of the paper, the body, should take about 3 to 5 pages. Then your conclusion. You need to clearly, briefly restate and summarize your position and your arguments. Don't just end it there. You need some kind of solid closing that reads like you're finished. You want to leave your audience with something to think about. So come up with an interesting closing statement, just like you did with the opening statement. Not the same statement, obviously, but you get the picture. Here are some hopefully helpful hints. First, stick to the issue. Don't go off on side tangents. Every sentence should be in your paper because it makes sense in the overall scheme of things, not just because you think it sounds good. Second, make sure your ideas flow logically from one point to the next. Make a point, clarify it. Be complete. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to discuss every detail to the point of exhaustion. This is not a master's thesis. It's an argument essay. I just mean explain and support your ideas clearly. Don't leave major claims or ideas out. Have closure at every level. That doesn't mean you need a concluding statement for every paragraph, just that you are done talking about one thing before you move on to the next. And again, there's a logical sequence to your sentences. This is not stream of consciousness performance art. It's a deliberate, well thought out, and organized discussion. Give yourself time to write. Don't assume it's going to flow magically from your fingertips when you throw it together the night before it's due. That will guarantee a crappy essay. Write a first draft and a second draft. Revise, revise, revise. Go to the writing center to make sure you're on the right track. Do a grammar and spelling check. Whether you're doing APA or MLA formatting, look at examples of those to make sure you're doing it correctly. Check your bibliography to make sure your sources are correctly cited according to the style you're using. Think of your reader the entire time you're involved in this process. You want to lead them through your arguments. Don't expect them to try to figure out what the heck you're talking about. In fact, these readers might be very good critical thinkers themselves, so keep that in mind. Good luck in the writing process. I know you can do it. This is the end of the lecture on Chapter 3.